הבהרה, התוכן המשודר מבוסס על עדויות אישיות של מרואיינים אשר נאמרו על דעתם בלבד. אין לראות בתוכן משום המלצה כלשהי לרבות המלצה רפואית ו/או נפשית, ואין לראות בו משום עידוד לביצוע פעולות כלשהן.
Iands Israel. החיים שאחרי החיים.
שלום, ברוכים הבאים לפודקאסט המצולם של איינדס ישראל. שלום מאיה.
שלום לכולם.
היום אנחנו מארחים את דוקטור אבן אלכסנדר, הוא נוירוכירורג שעבר חוויית סף מוות, והמקרה שלו הוא מעניין באופן מיוחד, כי זה איש מדע שעבר חוויה כזו. הוא גם כתב את הספר, את רב המחר, Proof of Heaven, הוכחה לגן עדן. זה הולך להיות מאוד מעניין, תחזיקו ראש. שלום, דוקטור אבן.
Shalom, it's good to be here. Thank you all so much for having me on.
It's good to have you.
I think it's important people understand a little bit my background. I trained as a neurosurgeon. My father was a neurosurgeon. He was a world leader in neurosurgery. And for him, he always had a perfect kind of acceptance of the science. And he taught science as chairman of a neurosurgical training program. But he was also, he had a strong belief in God and in the power of prayer. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and like so many from that era, I always knew that science is the pathway to truth. I wanted to believe what I heard in my Methodist church growing up in North Carolina, but then in a long career teaching neurosurgery, including 15 years as an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, I thought I had some idea of how brain, mind, and consciousness work. And that's why what happened next in my life is so extraordinary. It started at 4:30 in the morning, November 10th, 2008. I woke up with severe back pain, soon realized I had a horrific headache. And within 2 or 3 hours of that awakening, I was having grand mal seizures and was driven deep into coma. I had no idea what had taken over my life and driven me deep into coma, trying to kill me. But it turns out, as I discuss in my book, Proof of Heaven, it was a gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis that in reality should have killed me and certainly would have gotten rid of any reasonable kind of efforts of conscious awareness that my brain could have tried to muster. And that's why the case report on my medical records, which came out in September of 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases by Serbi Kanya and 2 other physicians who were not involved in my care, is so important because that case report, which is available on my website. If you go to ebenalexander.com, look at the blog postings for the September of 2018, and you'll find the case report is discussed in the blog, and then there's a link to it in the 3rd paragraph. But the thing about that case report that's so astonishing is it goes way beyond where I went in Proof of Heaven, where I discussed my medical records to some degree, but these 3 physicians had a long time to go through my records in detail. And I think they were even more kind of shocked by what they found than I was, because it's really a perfect model for human death. And the medically documented facts of my case, the damage to all 8 lobes of my brain, really left no way for me to have any kind of elaborate dream or hallucination. All that was gone, according to principles of modern neuroscience, because of the extensive damage to my neocortex. And then my very survival is kind of the ace in the hand right there, because when you read that case report, any physician who reads it will realize this is not the medical record of someone who goes on to make a full recovery. This is a medical record of someone who is going to succumb to this illness. So anyway, that was kind of the preamble, is the extraordinary gift of this journey that should not have happened according to the tenets of modern neuroscience. And that's why the scientific community takes it so seriously. The essence of my journey, first of all, very important to point out, one of the atypical features of my near-death experience, or NDE, was the amnesia, that I had no memory of anything of Eben Alexander's life before coma. I had no words, no language. Every bit of that was gone. It was an empty slate. And I think that was very important. I came to realize in the months and years after my coma, how some of the deepest and most profound lessons of my journey necessitated that tabula rasa, that complete eradication of my memories. So I had no assumptions, no prejudices, no religious beliefs, every bit of it gone. So that I just had a pure journey of experience and understanding. Started in what I call the earthworm's eye view, very primitive, coarse, kind of subterranean realm. And important to point out, I never at any point in the journey had a body awareness. There was no notion of a physical body at all. And I was just a speck of awareness. And in that early phase, it was a very dark and kind of subterranean realm, that earthworm's eye view. But I was rescued from that by a slowly spinning white light that came packaged with a perfect musical melody. And it was that light that served as a portal up into this rich, ultra-real gateway valley. People often think that near-death experiences must be vague and kind of dreamy, kind of mystical, quality, but they are actually the opposite. This world we live in these bodies is dreamlike by comparison to the ultra reality of that kind of experience. And more than 50% of near-death experiencers over thousands of years across all cultures remark on the sense of it being far more real than anything they've ever experienced. And that's also reflected in their memories, because his memories are very stable over decades. I've had people share their experiences with me after more than 50 years of never telling anyone else of their NDE, and yet they'll share it with me. That's kind of the beauty I have in this position, with people sharing their stories with me too. Now, as I entered that ultra-real gateway valley, it had a lot of Earth-like features. There were sparkling waterfalls into crystal blue pools. There was this absolutely lovely kind of meadow forested around the edges with thousands of beings dancing, lots of joy and festivities going on here. And it was a perfect world. I liken it to Plato's world of ideals in many ways. It's kind of the ideal ground for the soul. And that's where we reunite with our higher souls. That's where we go through life reviews, you know, your life flashing before your eyes. That happens in more than 50% of NDEs. And the life review is a very important concept, because I think people who have kind of a tough life review end up having a hellish NDE. It still steers them to correct things in their life and to become a much better person. But if they've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, that life review is not going to be fun, because you really have to go through every bit of that on the receiving end, because the life review is also not generally described as from the perspective of the soul going through it, but really they experience it from the perspective of those around them who were influenced by their thoughts and actions in life. And that's a very important thing, because it basically shows us how the life review is something that shows us the falsehood of our sense of self and boundaries of self. In many ways, we're all part of this one mind sharing this dream together. But in that gateway valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There are millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in these vast formations, colors beyond the rainbow, just an extraordinary vision of comfort and joy. And there was this lovely young woman on the butterfly wing. Those who've read Proof of Heaven will realize how crucial she was in my journey. She was kind of my guardian angel. And I'll never forget the deep message she gave to me telepathically just after I was aware of her existence. And that message, I believe, was a central message I was to bring back to this world. In my sharing and my story of my NDE. Her message was very simple, and it came into my own kind of awareness with the full power of her kind of emotional truth to it all. The message was, you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are cared for. And I cannot tell you how reassuring and validating that message was, because at that point in my journey, I was still very confused by so much of what was going on around me. And then all of a sudden, I started to feel a kinship with kind of the spiritual home. Oh, that's odd. Ooh, sorry. That kinship with the physical, spiritual home that realm represents for all of us. So when we die, there is nothing to fear. It's actually a liberation from the shackles of the prison of the physical brain and body. So in that aspect, very reassuring. And I remember that then all of the joy and festivity was being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of light, leaving a sparkling golden trail against this blue-black velvety sky. And these swooping orbs of light were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would thunder through my awareness. This incredibly profound music that is far beyond any music we could ever hear in our very limited four-dimensional space-time. And those angelic choirs, as I called them, swooping up above, provided yet another portal. I'm sorry, my light keeps acting out for some crazy reason.
Just ignore it.
Oh. Sorry. So it turns out that those angelic choirs provided yet another musical portal to higher levels. And I went through yet another wormhole on, or portal up into what I call the core realm. Infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with the divine love of that creative God source at the core of our very existence. That God source is not separate from us. That infinitely healing force of love, as most near-death experiencers will tell you, is actually right there. It's something we bathe in that kind of depth of the core realm and that kind of journey beyond. I remember seeing all of four-dimensional space-time had collapsed down. And then all of what I call deep time, which is a completely different ordering of events. Once you recognize that Earth time, that time flow in this universe, that's material universe that we experience, in many ways is just there to support the fiction and the drama of our lives. But for example, the life review shows you very clearly that all the events of your life are available in very robust, alive form, as presented in that spiritual realm. So in many ways, it's showing us that there's much more of a sense of eternity and deep time and the causal relationships of consciousness and its evolution or transformation in the universe from the perspective of those spiritual realms. Now, in that core realm, I'd seen the entire higher dimensional multiverse collapse down into this complex oversphere as part of the lessons I was to learn. It's one of the most challenging things about describing these events because they're not occurring in some linear narrative like we're used to living in this four-dimensional material world. You can have all of it happening seemingly at once. That's why life reviews are so shockingly efficient at delivering this information because they're not limited by the ticking of any earth clock. Now, in that core realm, I felt, as have so many other NDEers, the infinite healing power of love, of that God force. And then I also witnessed this beautiful orb of light, brighter than a million stars, that was there to serve as kind of a translator or interpreter. But there were times when in that core realm journey, I became the essence of all of it. And in a sense, it was demonstrating how that God force is right there at the core of each and every one of our conscious awareness. So that God force is not separate from us. That's one of the most astonishing and beautiful lessons of the NDE. And in many ways, I came away realizing the power of that kind of understanding of the origin of our very consciousness in these fields of infinite love and kindness and compassion of that spiritual realm. Now, it turns out I would just spontaneously tumble out of that sanctum sanctorum of the divine, that core realm, back into the earthworm's eye view. That was very mysterious the first time it happened, but I learned very rapidly by remembering the musical notes of the melody that I'd heard originally that ushered me up into that Gateway Valley from the earthworm's eye view. Just by remembering those notes, I could conjure up that spinning white light that served again as a portal. So the deep lesson there is music, or what we remember as music, vibration, frequency, even though obviously in those realms, it's not limited by the physics of the ear and the brain and what the ear and brain normally do with sounds in this dimension. But it's a much richer of form, and it's something we actually can use as souls for traversal of these realms. I went through multiple passages through these realms. I don't know how many, but it was several. And each time that beautiful woman was there on the butterfly wing in the Gateway Valley, welcoming me with the same beautiful and loving embrace of kind of the spiritual home that I was passing through, and always seeing all those thousands of souls dancing in the valley down below. All of it very beautiful and comforting. And again, all of it happening in a time when my medically documented case showed no way that my neocortex, which is the part of the brain neuroscience which they must be involved in all the details of conscious awareness, well, my neocortex was definitely offline. When you read that medical case report, you'll see that's exactly the case. And so it turns out, though, that every time I went into that core realm, I was advised, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back. We'll teach you many things. But it turns out that you know, there came a time when finally, when I tumbled back down to that earthworm my view, and I was trying to remember those musical notes of the melody, they no longer would conjure up that beautiful kind of wormhole passage up into the Gateway Valley. And to say I was sad at that moment would be a tremendous understatement, but I also knew by that point I could trust that I would be taken care of, just as my guardian angel had promised me. And just as I've been shown in that core realm about the incredible majesty of this overall journey, I knew I could trust in all of that. And so it was at the very end of that, when I was kind of banned from being able to get up into those lofty spiritual realms, that I witnessed thousands of souls going off around me, off into the distance. And when I came back, you know, and weeks later, writing it all up, I said that that was the power of prayer. What I witnessed was the murmuring energy coming up from all these beings that was very shocking, in that it was as welcoming and loving and embracing and as indicative of oneness as everything I'd experienced in those higher spiritual realms thus far in this journey. So that power of prayer was very beautifully brought to me, because the amazing thing was how it brought the same level of kind of comfort and love and belonging down into that lowest realm of the earthworm's eye view that I'd already experienced in the Gateway Valley and in the core realm. And so it basically connected all that love right back to wherever I was headed. I didn't know where it was, but it was back to this world. And it was then that I saw 6 faces who would kind of bubble up out of the muck. They'd say a few words and they'd disappear. I didn't understand any of the words. There was just this murmuring energy. And I remember them today as if it happened this morning. Those faces are as bright and memorable to me. But I also knew that as I came back to this world, literally hours later, because that was the day 7 of coma. It was a Sunday morning. It was the day my doctors had held the family conference, saying I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival early in the week down to a 2% chance of survival. And there was no chance for a meaningful quality recovery of life. And that's why they said it was time to stop the antibiotics and let nature take its course. And it was a few hours after that I started coming back to this world. But shockingly enough, my brain was so rattled by this whole event, all I remembered was where I had just been. So in fact, I did not even recognize my loved ones, my mother, my sisters, my former spouse, my sons standing at the bedside. I had no idea who these beings were. All I knew was where I just been. And then those memories from my life and identifying those loved ones at the bedside, all of that words, language started coming back within a few hours. But it took about 2 months for everything to come back, all my memories, all my knowledge of neurosurgery, cosmology, neuroscience, physics, every bit of that returned over about 2 months. Shockingly, some of my conversations with people, detailed conversations of distant life history, revealed that my memory quality after I came back post-coma was more intact and complete than similar memories from before coma. It's really shocking. It's something we discuss in my 3rd book, Living in a Mindful Universe, that was co-authored with my life partner, Karen Newell, is that memories are not even stored in the brain. Neurosurgeons have surmised that for a long time for various reasons having to do with brain resections, and no documented cases of long-term memory disappearance after surgical procedures. But the reality is memory is not stored in the brain. And that's one of the biggest nails in the coffin of materialist neuroscience, that it's something we haven't talked about too much until now. But the reality is all of this is very revealing about a revolution going on in science about the nature of consciousness. And that's where I think we can go next with this discussion.
Yeah, I have to say that I've read your books, and I've heard you speak many times and listened to talks that you've given, and every time I find myself, it's just so moving. So thank you for sharing that with us. I have actually a lot of questions. Try to get as many as we can. One of the things that you discussed, you talked about there being no space and no time. I think you called it deep time. And we talked also about how science now is starting to prove that there's also no matter, and that the core of everything is consciousness. And my question is, would it be correct to say that we're actually part of a giant superorganism? And if so, what would you say that humanity needs above all else in order for us to live in harmony, in unity?
I think it's really just coming to realize this deep truth that, is very much part of the emergent model from near-death experiences about the nature of reality. Now, it turns out, though, that scientists who study consciousness can go far, far beyond just dealing with near-death experiences. I mean, obviously, near-death experiences are never going to give us the ultimate answer about life after death, because those people don't die. Now, if you start reading hundreds or thousands of these accounts, you're certainly going to wonder, why is it we have these extraordinary kind of journeys, and how come they seem to be so similar? No matter what the medical circumstances that kind of drive us towards death, the commonality and kind of similarity of these stories is really shocking. But then the modern science of consciousness can take all other manner of similar events and of related events and start extrapolating from that huge database of kind of understanding. So, for example, you can start looking at the world of parapsychology and realize there's tremendous evidence for non-local consciousness, that consciousness is not created by the brain, is not limited to the physical senses here in our body's environs, but that in fact we have ways of knowing far beyond the ken of our physical senses. And that's where things like remote viewing are very important. That's, some people know the Stargate program of US intelligence back in the late 20th century. Well, that was just one of many. And Israel had a similar program, the Soviets, et cetera. And so remote viewing has been very well established as a scientific fact by scientists and statisticians who study it. Likewise, telepathy. Telepathy is a very real phenomenon. If you read Guy Léon Playfair's book on twin telepathy, you'll never doubt the reality of telepathy again. That's just one resource. And then there's a whole host of other kind of things like precognition, that we can know the future, presentiment, where our autonomic nervous system knows the future, and you can demonstrate that in certain ways. These are all very real scientific aspects of consciousness that is not so limited to this apparent here and now, and certainly refute the simplistic idea that the brain is the creator of consciousness. And then, of course, you have near-death experiences, shared death experiences, deathbed visions, after-death communications, and of course, the biggie in many ways is the scientific evidence for reincarnation. If you go to uvadops.org, you'll learn a tremendous amount about all of this kind of work: parapsychology, neuroscience, the hard problem of consciousness. But especially there, they've also studied more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children, strongly suggestive of reincarnation. So clearly, from a scientific perspective, understanding the brain-mind relationship, and that means ultimately the nature of reality, because none of us has ever known anything other than the inside of our own consciousness. And so this scientific revolution is extraordinary. It points to the existence of one mind, that God force mind that so many near-death experiences have encountered, that reassures them so much because of the kind of love and the wholeness of it all. That is the mind that we are actually sharing. This is something that quantum physicists suggested 100 years ago. Erwin Schrödinger, Wolfgang Pauli, Eugene Wigner, John von Neumann, Pascual Jordan and others all recognize that the experiments looking at atomic matter and the behavior of light in the subatomic realm and the material world around us had traces that suggested the primacy of consciousness. And today, where all this is headed in terms of science of consciousness and quantum physics is a recognition of the one mind that we're all sharing. I like to use the analogy, it's like a giant diamond with all these facets, and each and every one of us is a different facet. Experiencing the reality of the one mind in a slightly different way, but it's what allows that one mind to grow and transform. So we're each a different facet on the diamond, but don't lose sight of the fact that there really is one mind at the core of all of it. And it's not just about human beings. In fact, our little linguistic voice in our head, that's where most of us would appeal to the power of reason and logic, that little linguistic voice. Well, it's also the voice of our ego, which uses fear and anxiety as its main tools. And, you know, that little voice is not your consciousness. I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice the annoying roommate. Well, this is all about bypassing that annoying roommate, the ego mind, which is the giant problem in our world today is this false sense of separation from each other that came out of materialist science. But the real science, the most proven field of science that's quantum informed, has everything to do with unification, that we're all in this together. We are all one. And this is a lesson that's been told by near-death experiencers for thousands of years. And it's a deep truth that all of us need to hear. And the good news is we can cultivate our relationship with that one mind through meditation and centering prayer in ways that we never need to have our own NDE to know all this. As sentient beings, we can all come into the same knowledge through a process of going within and starting to explore that consciousness.
So we are essentially consciousness talk to itself right now.
That is very much the case, you know, and you often hear this kind of discussion lead people into the simulation hypothesis, you know, which is kind of that we're all avatars in a video game played by some higher intelligence being. And that's kind of a pop culture way to look at it that really doesn't properly accept the kind of majesty and awe of that realm. But I think the reality is we're really sharing that one mind. And the more we can come to realize that the best way to kind of evolve our relationship with that loving, infinitely healing force is to bring that love into ourselves, love ourselves as the divine and sacred beings we are, as expressions of that one mind, and share that love. Love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance with all of our fellow beings. And that absolutely includes the animal kingdom, because for humans to think they have this, you know, this big advantage of their consciousness, well, in fact, they're at a disadvantage with that linguistic brain and that ego mind trying to talk them out of deeper realities that I think in many ways animals are more privy to, of the connection, the telepathic connection that they seem to share. So this is really about growing into that higher kind of vision that's been portrayed for thousands of years in various spiritual traditions. And now, of course, we have the science of the current era, which is very valuable because it's a mode of objective comparison of information between humans. The science is supporting the very same thing. There's no way to ignore the spiritual nature of the universe and the spiritual nature of us. We are primarily spiritual beings connected at that mental and spiritual level, and not the physical beings that seem to be separated that our culture has taught us we are.
People through science learning now that we need to grow into this higher vision, which is this true vision of what we truly are. And you talked about it socially, and you talked also about, you know, the animal kingdom. And I wanted to ask you, maybe kind of to add on to that more specifically, how can your spiritual experience that you said is based on oneness and unconditional love, how can we do this? How can it be translated into our reality in such a way that can supply an alternative social doctrine to the way that we live today, to the current, you know, technological, economic, and social reality that we live in today?
Well, that is a beautiful question, because that's really where the action is. There's a reason why we're going through this transformation. I would say it's basically the culmination of probably a 5,000 or 6,000 year kind of history of humanity, all kind of reaching towards this deeper understanding and this lesson of oneness and connectedness. And I believe we're actually coming to the culmination of that and the successful completion of that. But the reason it's so important is because when you look back over the last few centuries especially, what we see is kind of this blossoming of human intellectual, kind of scientific, philosophical insights and technological insights about our relationship with the world and our ability to actually modulate it. And there have been a lot of successes in science, successes in, say, in medical care, successes in transportation, successes in energy acquisition, tremendous successes in communication, although a lot of it has also had kind of a dark underbelly. There's a darker side to a lot of that progress that I would say has come about because of the divorce between our rational, intellectual, scientific side and our spiritual side. And that divorce was so severe in the 19th and 20th centuries that basically it allowed the chemists to commit their sins in World War I, developing high explosives, machine guns, and poison gases. The physicists committed their sins in World War II with development of atomic bombs. If we're ever stupid enough to have a World War III, I promise you World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. I think that might be a paraphrase of Albert Einstein, so I don't want to claim it, but it's absolutely real. And it's that dark underbelly that is so bad, the addiction to fossil fuels. Look at the carbon dioxide levels. The global climate change is absolutely undeniable. You can be ignorant of it, but when you study the facts, we are in deep, deep trouble with this addiction to fossil fuels. We're already way past the point of no return. We need to stop. Now, the plastic pollution, there's a gyre twice the size of the state of Texas floating in the Eastern Pacific, choking off animal life. That's all humans, Homo sapiens. You know, sapiens means wise. Well, yeah, I'll admit we've got some wisdom in this technological and scientific revolution, but a tremendous amount of kind of darkness and ignorance and misuse of our abilities, to where we now threaten basically 1 million species on Earth are threatened with extinction due to the action of one species. So I think it's unfair to call ourselves Homo sapiens. We really need to grow into that role. And that is exactly what we're talking about, because that false sense of separation that comes from the scientific world, reductive materialism, that's the generic name for our kind of conventional science that I studied and worshiped before my coma. I do not use that term lightly, because materialist science is a faith-based religion that actually has less to support it than some of the faith-based religions. And the reason for that is it has not fully accepted the deep wisdom emerging from the world of quantum physics that informs us of the unity of consciousness. The brain is a filter that filters in this primordial mind. The brain is not creating consciousness any more than the brain stores memories. All of that comes from the spiritual realm beyond four-dimensional space-time. And it's something we have access to. I mean, human beings are sentient beings. We have access to the mental layer of the universe. But the mental layer is a top-down causal layer, very different from the bottom-up causality that is postulated by many, some in the world of quantum physics, who think that that bottom-up causality works. That is, that if you understand photons, electrons, quarks, all the laws that govern their interactions and assemble atoms and molecules, then you can explain everything. But that same kind of materialist viewpoint says you don't even have free will, because to the materialist who's stuck in a Newtonian determinism that was outmoded a century ago, they still believe that when the body dies, that's the end of conscious awareness, because they falsely believe the physical world is all that exists and that the brain is creating consciousness, whereas consciousness is actually creating all of emergent reality. The sooner our world wakes up to this in a deep way, starts to realize that we have tremendous power, just as we've shown in medical science with placebo effect. You know, that's mind over matter, period. It completely defies materialist explanations of, you know, kind of molecular mechanisms of healing and of the way this world works. Mind over matter through placebo effect is very powerful. Ask Big Pharma if you don't believe placebo effect is real. And it's just another example of how our mind has tremendous power over our emerging reality. And as we come together to realize we're really sharing one mind and we're bound together through the forces of love and compassion and kindness, that's when humanity can truly become wise.
What advice would you give to people? And it can be on a level of community, it could be healthcare, it could be financial, or even people's walking around feeling so lonely. What advice would you give specifically that people should do that would allow using access to what you know that would reflect our true spiritual reality? How can we translate our true spiritual reality to the way that society is, to the way that we live today?
By paying attention to this revolution, paying attention to stories of near-death experiences and shared-death experiences. Ken Ring, who was one of the original founders of Iands in the US, Ken Ring has written extensively on how powerful just knowing about NDEs can be to people at large. So the more people learn about this is why you're forming an Iands group in Israel is absolutely essential. Getting this word out, and plus Iands provides a base for people who have had these experiences. I mean, believe me, when you have it, you will be shocked no end. It's completely unexpected, and oh my God, what a gift it is. And yet it's not something you can extrapolate from your prior experience. So it can be kind of shocking. You might even think, oh my God, if I tell my doctor about this, he'll think I'm crazy. And that's why Iands groups around the world are so important, because they provide a safe haven for people to share their stories, and they also serve as a beautiful repository of knowledge and of an index library of all these kind of cases to share with other people. And the more people know what's possible and what's happened to others in these extraordinary settings of dying or near dying, the more they realize what their potential is for themselves. And it's all about consciousness and all about going within consciousness. So yes, it's important how we live our lives and make our choices in life, but that is where near-death experiences to me are most important. Because the big message from the NDE community is not, oh, when you die, your conscious awareness is actually expanded tremendously. The big message is, oh, we are responsible for our choices. We don't get off the hook just claiming that, materialist science would say it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, that you don't have free will.
How do you explain quantum entanglement?
Exactly. I mean, quantum entanglement is one of the most fundamental findings, in this kind of richness of quantum physics and what it informs us about. And it absolutely suggests the entanglement of minds. I know I have a favorite book by Dean Radin. It's called Entangled Minds. Came out about a decade ago. It's a very powerful kind of expose of the science behind all of this. Yeah, Dean Radin, I would recommend all of his books. I think he's written 4 that I know of that are really world-changing, and they go a long way. So highly recommended. Real Magic is an incredible book too, and it just takes it to kind of the next level.
Do you think that we're born as clean slates, or do you think that we have a kind of spiritual instinct, or like a universal spiritual DNA that's common for all souls, and that's kind of what leads us to have a natural attraction to love and peace and grace and feel good with that? And if that's true, could that be what is called a human conscience?
Well, first of all, I'll remind you, I mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the big kind of scientific fields of study that has a lot of relevance here are those studies out of University of Virginia, and others around the world study them too, but past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. Reincarnation is absolutely real. The scientific data supports it. So get used to it. It's the way the world works. Any models of consciousness need to expand to fully incorporate how our soul can basically come back into new bodies, and that this is a process of progressive growth. So, and the other side of that coin, of course, is we've all been here before. Now, we don't have memories of that because the memories disappear. And as Jim Tucker, who's the head of UVA DOPS now, will tell you, if you want to study those cases, past life memories in children, you better get at them before age 5 or 6, because after that, those memories get covered up. And I would say probably all of us have some past life and between life memories at a very early age. So if you have access to a child, under age 6, I encourage you to ask them, where were you before you were here in this world, and see what you get. It's amazing how often people get extraordinary answers to that show that we've been here before. Now, this goes beyond just kind of the scientific curiosity of reincarnation, because in fact, there's an entire world of transpersonal psychology that began with the work of Carl Jung, and then the work of leading clinicians like Dr. Stan Grof, Dr. Michael Newton, Dr. Brian Weiss. They've all done incredible work reflecting on the reality of the fact that our souls have been here before. Transpersonal psychology just means to fully understand the kind of psychological challenges and events of this lifetime. You got to realize your psyche's been here before. It basically set up a stage of certain events that you were going to live through in this lifetime as part of your growth. This is all about a growth towards a goal. So it's not the blind mechanistic wheel of reincarnation, for example, that some would say is part of certain religious traditions, but this is more about a reincarnation that is focused. It's focused on a goal. In fact, the way I saw reincarnation in my own journey, given that with the amnesia for the life of Eben Alexander, I could not have an Eben Alexander life review. But I did witness life reviews in very profound forms. And one of the most extraordinary was this net that I saw in the core realm, in that realm of ultimate lessons. And I liken it to Indra's net, which is from Eastern spiritual traditions. And what I saw were these interwoven threads. And I realized that those were soul journeys, soul lives, going through in and out of incarnations and then between life periods. It was an incredible vision, but it was concentric. It led towards a core, a center of golden light that was, in many ways, I would say, the what's been called by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit priest and paleontologist. He was a scientist. He was also a spiritual figure. In the mid-20th century, he wrote a book called The Phenomenon of Man. And in that book, he talks about evolution, not just Darwinian evolution, but a much grander form of evolution of all consciousness. And that was really what my kind of Indra's net vision was in my journey. So I saw life reviews, I saw reincarnation writ large in this beautiful vision. But it took me a while after my NDE in trying to fully interpret what that meant. But I've revisited it in meditation many a time and have come to this beautiful vision of how that is really what's going on here. So it's not some blind mechanistic wheel. Our lives have a tremendous meaning and purpose to them. But the only way to really appreciate that is to see that we've been here in previous lifetimes and will continue in future lifetimes, all participating in this evolution of consciousness and helping Homo sapiens to actually come into the realm of the wise in a cosmic mind sense.
You talk now about reincarnation, and I really like that you use the term evolution of consciousness. And you use this term a lot, and I wonder, why is it that we use this term? What does it mean? And is there a difference between consciousness and the soul?
Well, you know, what I've come to realize that the linguistic brain can lead us into all kinds of cul-de-sacs and falsehoods. So, and that's because language, you know, as Rene Descartes said, to define is to limit. Well, anytime we limit and kind of compartmentalize part of this universe in studying it, we introduce distortions. That's one of the biggest problems with our reductive materialist scientific model, is it's always kind of breaking pieces of the universe apart, trying to isolate them in a way that they can study them, but you always are introducing distortions by doing that kind of thing. So I would tend to look at kind of mind, consciousness, soul as kind of overlapping terms for this essence of awareness that each and every one of us knows very well. We know what it's like to be self-aware. The interesting thing is we're really borrowing that kind of quality from the universe at large. That self-awareness is consciousness. That is what we're all sharing in this one mind. And so I think that these ideas of primordial mind and kind of the brain as a filter help us to elaborate that and realize that the soul is what comes in and out of these existences. The other way I saw it in my journey, in addition to that Indra's net vision, was this beautiful vision of flying fish. And when we're down in the water, we're kind of temporarily dumbed down. We don't know, we don't have the knowledge of our higher soul, so we only think we're in that one little lifetime, in that one little body associated with these others. But then we pop up out of the water. That's when we leave our physical body at the time of death. That's when we reunite with higher soul, reunite with our soul groups, go through our life reviews, and then plan those next incarnations, and then dive back in. So extraordinary visions. Yeah, they were absolutely stunning, and it's taken me a long time to kind of fully unravel them. But I think that makes a kind of beautiful sense to understand how we're really all in this together. And as opposed to what materialist science would tell you, that you don't even have free will because it's just electron fluxes and chemical reactions in the brain giving you an illusion of free will, just the opposite is what comes out of this more mature and refined worldview and understanding of the nature of primacy of consciousness and the nature of reality.
We talked about consciousness. You talked about light in all different kinds of aspects, and we're obviously talking about, each person will use whatever term they want, but we're talking about God. And I wonder if you could share with us the relation between consciousness, light, and God, and if there is a hierarchy between them.
Well, in some ways, yes, there's a hierarchy. But I would also point out that there's a lot of it, you know, I'm not that splitter, I'm that lumper. And a lot of it is the very same thing. I came away from my journey realizing that the very essence of conscious awareness was that infinitely healing and loving God force at the core of all of reality. And so we're not separate from it. That's the thing. People, you know, our religious systems often kind of portray this view of God where God is lofty up in the sky. God is very judgmental. That's not what NDEs will tell you. In fact, there's a wonderful book I can recommend. It's by Christopher Koppes, C-O-P-P-E-S. It's called The Essence of Religions. And he's the head of Iands in the Netherlands, or at least one of the founders of Iands Netherlands. And he wrote a beautiful book that takes the major faiths of this world and shows how each and every one of them variously aligns somewhat with NDEs. But in many ways, this book is valuable because it shows how the commonality, the deep meditative tradition of all the great faiths comes into alignment. So we often think of religions as being disparate and kind of chaotic because they conflict with each other in their superficial dogma. The deep reality is from the meditative and prayerful traditions, they all coalesce into this notion of the power and the importance of love and compassion, kindness and mercy in dealing with all of our fellow beings. And these are at the heart of all the great religions. And I would say Christopher Koppes' book goes a long way towards unifying kind of the deeper mystical traditions of religions, because the superficial dogma is very misleading. It was put there by dysfunctional humans in many ways to try and control other humans, whereas the original message of the prophets was always one more of alignment, especially when you take them in their historical context. For example, I think Muhammad, was coming along at a period when he and his thoughts were greatly persecuted. So he had to respond to that in a certain form. But really at the depth, I think all of these traditions and messages from the prophets align with this notion of love, that God is within us and not some external force. And of course, most humans with their little ego mind think, what do you mean? This is not God. You know, my ego mind allows me to be all kinds of darkness and evil if I want to be. Well, that's why we're here to learn and grow. Because ultimately, the guide from NDEs, from these profound experiences, show us that there really is only one way forward, and that is with love, compassion, kindness, mercy, forgiveness for all of our fellow beings. And it begins with love and kindness to ourselves. Because I saw after my journey that some of the worst stuff perpetrated in this world is because we don't even love ourselves enough as the divine, sacred, eternally connected beings that we truly are.
You talk now about a misleading interpretation of religion. It's kind of given like a bad reputation. And you talked earlier, I think when you discussed life review, you talked about, you used the term hellish NDE. And I want to kind of connect these two things and ask you, a lot of NDEs have a mixture of light and darkness. And you also described in your experience that you were in the realm of the earthworm's eye view, which I never heard or read anywhere that you described it negatively, that it was not a place of, there was nothing about judgment or punishment. But yet so many people connect NDEs to fear and to punishment. And maybe it goes back to what you said, that, that there was a misinterpretation that caused this fear and separateness, and when in fact it's all about love. And my question is, could it be that what is feared as punishment isn't really punishment, and what it actually is a feedback of the light to the NDEer?
Well, that's exactly what life reviews are. They're a mid-course corrective mechanism that allows us, you know, at the end of our lives, if there are residual issues where we were never able to seek amends or forgiveness from those that we might have wronged, the life review is an opportunity to kind of revisit that, learn from it, so that in the next incarnation, we don't have to deal with the very same issues. So you're absolutely right. The life review gives us that opportunity. Now, I love how my partner and co-author of third book, Living the Mindful Universe, Karen Newell, often talks about the daily review. For her, that's crucial. Why save all this stuff up to, you know, when you die? Why not deal with it as you go and make those amends and forgiveness and live a life where you're handing out more of love and kindness and compassion to others? And this is where I think meditation is very helpful, because if we go within on a regular basis, we can start to determine this and have a very kind of concrete realization of the power and value of these concepts of love and kindness through our meditative experiences. And for those who don't already have a powerful tool for meditation, I would suggest go to sacredacoustics.com. It's something we discuss in our book a lot in Living in a Mindful Universe of meditation, and especially powerful tools. That one uses binaural beat brainwave entrainment, but this is all about getting in touch, thinning the veil, and getting in touch with that primordial mind, that universal consciousness, and that infinitely healing power of love. And all of us can do that by going within. And the important thing of going within is you're trying to put that little voice of the running stream of thoughts in your head, your ego mind, you're trying to put that in time out. Because if you got that little anxious voice running in your head, there's no way you're going to get to any kind of meaningful connection to that primordial mind and traverse the veil. But Sacred Acoustics is a very powerful way for doing that. I use Sacred Acoustics for meditation an hour or two a day. I've been doing it for more than a decade. It's been absolutely essential for me to get back to my NDE and start to process it, understand it, and develop an ongoing relationship with the various kind of entities and denizens and that infinitely loving God force at the core of my experience. All of that is something that I strengthen regularly through meditation. And that's where I believe people can bridge the gap in their daily existence between that spiritual realm, the home of their higher soul, and this material world where our souls actually do the growing. This is where we actually make progress. And that's why I think our souls are chomping at the bit to come back into these bodies again and again, even though they know they're going to be temporarily dumbed down to these deeper truths in living these lives. That's what gives us kind of buy-in and skin in the game to have the emotional engagement that we do living these lives. And that's where the real power of growth comes into it all.
Every time you speak about certain things, you talked about Karen and how she talked about how, you know, there should be a life review that's daily. And you talk about our purpose here and that we need to grow. You talked also in your experience about how every time that you remembered the notes, you had traveled to a higher realm. And it leads me to think about Kabbalah, where from what I've learned, Kabbalah uses the term light and vessel. And it talks about the resonance between them. And it's a complex idea, but in simple terms, it talks about the merging of light with the vessel, and that it has a direct correlation between what the person identifies with. And every time that you talk about growing, and every time you talk about us coming back to our, and being aware of our spiritual true nature, and I think about, you know, not identifying with the ego, and I think about this feedback that we receive from the light. Where would you, in your experience that you had, how, if you could share with us something that kind of uses these terms or has a correlation to these terms?
The important thing to point out is that spiritual realm, as you ascend to more and more refined levels of it, all the kind of dualities and paradoxes disappear. So I would describe what I witnessed in the core realm as a dazzling darkness. It was a brilliant light, but it was there in the kind of presence and coexisting with this incredible inky blackness. So, you know, our language is very kind of misleading, and our language is good for describing a trip to Disney World, but our language is quite inadequate for describing these deeper and profound journeys. And I suspect that the Kabbalah, because of its kind of interest in these realms, probably does have a language that's more suiting. And it's really about kind of connection. As I've said, any kind of defining and limiting, I believe, works against our deeper understanding of consciousness and our relationship to the co-creative forces of the universe. So I think it's really about kind of coming into that oneness. And in many ways, you can kind of talk about it and lead the way through language, but ultimately, to get it, we have to go within.
So what do you think we take with us, with our actions, to the next world, next existence?
Well, I think it's all a continuation in many ways. And a lot of what we experience there in terms of kind of life review and kind of the essence of communications with loved ones who have left a physical world before us, but that we reunite with in that setting, is about a continuation of the journey. And the journey really reflects the goal of this kind of 5,000 year plus evolution of consciousness itself. And it's really, I would say, something that humanity has struggled with for the last few thousand years. We've attempted answers from some of our spiritual systems. They all kind of glimpse that deeper truth of unity and of the oneness of mind and of purpose and of connection and of love. But we really haven't learned it. We don't live it as a world, as a society. And that's really what needs to happen. That's what this awakening is all about. The very survival of life on our planet depends on this awakening, because, as I said earlier, that Homo sapiens, not very wise with the science and technological kind of price we pay in terms of climate change and pollution and squandering of resources, economic polarization. There are a lot of ways that false sense of separation is very damaging. And so these lessons of oneness and connection, and being here to take care of each other, and especially to take care of the least and the last and the lost, the refugees, in this world today. We're really here to take care of each other, and no soul should be left behind in this process. So this awakening is absolutely imperative for the survival and for the prosperity and thriving of life on Earth. Well, it's that we're all in this together. And if we hurt another, we are truly hurting ourselves. It's almost like the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe through the life review and how it unfolds. And that golden rule basically is written in all of the major faith traditions, and also in non-faith-based kind of moral and ethical positions, talking about that treat others as you would like to be treated. Well, that is absolutely written into the fabric of the universe through life reviews. And the more we can take that lesson to heart and come out and realize that we're here really to help others and to be of service to the higher good. These are very important concepts that have to do with successfully awakening this world and not having it succumb to the kind of false, petty business of self-serving, materialistic, I'm the one who gets it all. It was a misinterpretation of evolution, of Darwinian evolution in many ways, perpetrating this notion of survival of the fittest, as if competition was what led to success in the biological world. That's not true. Most biologists will tell you that it's actually collaboration and cooperation between members of a species and even between species that allows for various species to thrive in this world. It's not just hinged on that one little competition idea. And that has perpetrated itself through our social and economic systems, even through our kind of nation state systems, to perpetrate this conflict, and the fact that we still have wars and violent conflict in our societies.
Don't you think for this science and spirituality need to merge?
Absolutely. That kind of goes almost without saying, that what we're really talking about is an acknowledgement that the modern science, especially as we take this tremendous lesson of quantum physics, promoting the notion of the one mind and the shared mind, that we're all really, and that consciousness is primordial in the universe. There's a top-down causality. Those who are interested in that from a physics viewpoint, I would steer you to the writings of George F.R. Ellis. He's a South African mathematician who's written extensively about top-down causality in quantum physics. But that's really what we're talking about, objective idealism. And that's the position we promote in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. People who want to learn a lot more can go to ebenalexander.com and certainly to sacredacoustics.com to learn more about the meditative techniques. I would also encourage people to join us. Karen and I have a free bi-weekly webinar we've been doing ever since the pandemic started. You can join it through unitedinhopeandhealing.com and join up to that. Every other Thursday we have a guest, a near-death experiencer or someone who studies these, a scientist who studies consciousness. We've had a tremendous number of guests. So if you go to unitedinhopeandhealing.com, you can find the whole reservoir of those interviews we've done so far, and we'll keep doing them every 2 weeks moving forward.
Okay, I have a personal question because I'm a musician, and
right.
I wonder if you remember the notes that you heard there. Like you said, you heard this music.
That's a great question. And yes, I'm often asked that. And the thing is, I can re-experience the music getting deep, deep, deep into those levels, which I can do through meditation, even though it doesn't happen every time by a long shot. It can take me weeks to get back into a proper depth of transformation. But that music is available in those deepest realms. But it is not a music that you could ever reproduce in four-dimensional space-time. It goes far beyond that. In many ways, it is like the world of ideals, Plato's world of forms, that there's a kind of a world of ideals. That's where our life reviews go on, because for the individual, in many ways, that is a world of ideals where we're presented with the various major lessons of our life, and we have an opportunity to kind of rework how we deal with that and think of that, and how we've sought to make amends with others that we might have hurt along the pathway. So it's really that much bigger kind of a vision of self and understanding, relationship to the world, exemplified through the life review. But it's something that we can all kind of start to get to through deep meditation.
Amazing. Wow.
Before we finish, I just wanted to ask you, do you have any kind of message that you want to relay, especially in light of the current times, you know, with the pandemic and everything?
Well, I think the main lesson is don't be sucker punched by buying into what your ego mind is trying to lead you into with fear and anxiety as its main tools. We really are much grander beings than that. This is about no soul being left behind. This awakening that we're talking about of the scientific revolution of our consciousness and the primacy of mind is a revolution that involves each and every soul on earth. So it's important for everyone to join in this tremendous kind of upswell of human activity towards understanding the deeper nature of our connectedness and of that God force in our lives, and start living those lives with proper choice that reflect this kind of infinitely healing power of unconditional love in our lives.
Thank you so
Amazing.
much. Thank you. It was a pleasure having you here with us.
Yes.
It was a really big honor, personally, and to Iands Israel.
And thank you for starting an Iands group in Israel. I think that's very important. Israel is, you know, in a kind of a crucial position in this world in terms of everything going on, the spiritual awakening. I think Israel is playing a tremendous role. So to have an Iands group in Israel, I think will serve as a catalyst to really help this world to wake up. So I'm very glad. I want to support your efforts as best I can. So keep me posted. Let me know what you need. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Talk
you.
again soon, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.